Hi there. It's been a while since my last narrated video, largely thanks to the White Strikes Mayhem PvP event that I absolutely no-lived. I have a ton of footage from that event that I will be putting into a big compilation, but first I wanted to talk about a topic that comes up during every Mayhem event: Nightblades. Every time a Mayhem event is around the corner, I see friends and foes alike logging into their Nightblade alts, because Mayhem is a great time to be a Nightblade. Many casual PvPers return to the battlefield, while yet more players enter the chaos of Cyrodiil for the first time. And what better way to farm those players than to be a sneaky asshole and one-shot them? Still, as a Nightblade main, I often see those Nightblade tourists turn into farming material themselves, and I can see why. If you look up ganking builds on YouTube, these videos will often focus on what gear to wear and what skills to use. What they don't often talk about is how to conduct yourself on the battlefield in order to get the most out of your build. Because while most Nightblade builds have a pretty straightforward combo that can deal a ton of damage, there are other skills that come into play if you want to be a truly effective Nightblade. So what I'll be talking about today is 5 essential skills or dirty secrets that will help you become a better Nightblade. Now, before we start, let me briefly clarify what this video is and who it is for. There are many ways to play Nightblade. Personally, I play a Stamblade that can more than hold its own in an open 1v1. There's even Nightblade brawlers out there who do not use invisibility at all. And while some of the tips in this video will also be relevant to that kind of gameplay, this video is primarily oriented towards players who choose a more hit-and-run ganking type of gameplay. After all, these are the builds that are the most popular during White Strikes Mayhem, and I'm here to help you prepare for when that event comes back in a few months. This is also not a build video. I'm not a great theory crafter, and I often create builds by combining my own ideas with the advice of more knowledgeable friends. Or I just look up builds by qualified ESO YouTubers such as Luca Cash. Finally, the message of this video is not that I'm the greatest Nightblade in ESO. I would say that I'm a fairly average player who performs well by gradually learning how to get the most out of my limited abilities. That being said, I do not always succeed in sticking to my own advice in the heat of combat, so I screw up a lot, and please don't expose me. Without further delay, let us move on to what is perhaps the dirtiest Nightblade secret of them all: target selection. Have you ever watched a compilation of some Nightblade one-shotting players left and right, but when you play that exact same build, you make it about halfway through your opponent's health bar before he turns around and smacks you with a Dawnbreaker? If so, you might have to work on your target selection and prioritization. Before all else, I highly recommend you turn on the numbers on health bars. You can do this by going into settings and then to combat. This will allow you to see exactly how many health points other players have and how many % of their total HP pool they have left. This is useful for all classes, but especially for ganking oriented Nightblades. As a ganker, your goal is to take out a target as quickly as possible and retreat so you can prepare for your next strike. This means that the longer you take to kill a target, the more opportunity it gives to your opponent to fight back or for their friends to come to their rescue. Bite off more than you can chew, and you're what's for dinner tonight. Looking at a character's HP pool can give you a first good indication of how fast you'll be able to get rid of them. Of course, there are other factors at play, such as the target's resistances and their gear, and also how big your own burst is, but it's as good a starting point as any. One piece of advice I always give to people who are new to ganking is to select their targets based on their HP pool and slowly work their way up as they grow more comfortable. Start with players who pack 22k max HP or less. Unless they're running some crazy troll build, these players should die easily to a single burst combo. Players with 22k max HP will often either be gankers or bombers themselves, or inexperienced players running PvE builds. Once you reliably drop those players, move up to the category of players who have between 22k and 25k HP. These players are a bit more common and do not always fall into the category of gankers themselves, as some Templars and Sorcerers are comfortable with lower HP pools. Still, unless these players are shielded up or holding block while standing in AoE heal, they should also die in one combo in most cases. Then there's a category of players who have between 25k and 30k health. These can be tricky as you might need an ulti to drop them quickly, How fast these players go down depends entirely on their build. Someone wearing all Divine's gear with some tri-stat glyphs will still melt like butter, but a stage 3 vampire with defensive armor traits and champion points is not gonna go down easily. Typically, players who pack over 30k health are difficult to drop in one combo. With the right build, it's definitely possible, but they would not be your top priority during a big siege or battle. The risk of getting bogged down is simply too high. As I said before, maximum HP is merely an indication to help you choose between multiple targets, but there are other factors to look out for. One such factor is simply what the other player is doing. If they are preoccupied with another task, then it's unlikely that they'll be prepared to eat a full combo from a ganker. We all know that siegers are particularly vulnerable, and picking off squishy players who are shooting their ballista is a legit tactic. The same applies to enemies who are busy attacking another player. Once they go on the attack, they're less likely to keep up a defensive rotation, which is the ideal moment to hit them in the back. Hey, this is warfare, nobody said it had to be honorable. Speaking of having no honor, some of the easiest kills you'll get is targeting enemy gankers, but more on that later. To summarize, ganking has everything to do with target selection, but it's something that's not often talked about. I don't know why this is, like maybe gankers feel like their craft is less valid if they admit that they're attacking vulnerable players, but it's still a reality that you'll have to deal with if you don't want to set yourself up for failure. So when you watch someone else's ganking compilation and you think their build looks like something you want to try for yourself, first take a very good look at what type of players they're killing. Not just their HP pool, but also their alliance rank, their level, and their general skill when dealing with pressure. Also, look at what server they're playing on. Having played PvP on both PCEU and PCNA, I have noticed that there's a lot more squishy people running about on PCNA, which means that some builds that work on PCNA might not actually work on PCEU. More concretely, I would highly advise against playing a bow ganker on PCEU. Outside of Whitestrake's Mayhem, that playstyle is simply highly ineffective. On to another dirty Nightblade secret, the art of being unpredictable and not greedy. When playing a typical ganking build, you'll invest all resources in maxing out your damage, which often results in a low HP pool and low resist. In short, you'll be quite squishy yourself. And as we've just learned, being squishy makes you the ideal target for other gankers. What makes this extra dangerous is that it takes one to know one. A ganker will likely know how other gankers think, so it's important to avoid being too on the nose with your ganking habits. Make your next move difficult to predict. Let's talk about one of the most typical scenarios in Cyrodiil, a big siege. Every siege will have gankers trying to take bites out of the enemy line, but also defenders on the lookout for those same gankers. Those defenders might be any class, but they can also be gankers themselves, just hiding in the shadows until an enemy Nightblade pops up out of stealth. This makes the target selection we talked about earlier all the more important. You have to quickly take out an enemy sieger before their defenders have a chance to jump on you. After all, ganking someone is essentially announcing your presence to the enemy faction. Being greedy and trying to gank too many people in too quick a succession will drastically increase the likelihood that you'll get compromised. When I defended sieges during Whitestrake's Mayhem, a tactic I often employed successfully was that I waited for a ganker to pop out and kill the first ally. I then waited near the fallen player's body, assuming that that same ganker would come to try and also kill the player trying to resurrect. Often this would prove to be the case, and I could just immediately emerge from stealth and stomp them like a whack-a-mole. In this scenario, which played out plenty of times over the course of the event, it was greed that got the enemy ganker killed. Think of ganking as the wanted stars in GTA. The more people you kill in a short amount of time, the more heat you will have on your back. Linger somewhere too long while committing crimes, and the army will come to take you out. So it might be a good idea to lose some of those wanted stars in between kills. But even before you have accrued 5 wanted stars, it's important to remain vigilant. As a defender, I can try to evaluate which of my allies is most at risk of getting ganked. As we've learned in a previous segment, It's players who are isolated and have a low HP pool. So there might be a chance that if a ganker is too obvious with their target selection, a player like me will be there waiting for them. So, it is important to realize that good target selection doesn't always entail going for the lowest hanging fruit. It's important to keep a balance between picking the right target and maintaining the element of surprise. Some of this is simply something that comes with experience and being able to read a combat situation, but this is what will turn you from a mediocre Nightblade into an absolute menace for the enemy. So far we have talked about target selection and unpredictability. The two might seem a bit contradictory, as I told you to go for an obvious target without making it too obvious. To make it more clear how to balance these two skills, I would like to introduce you to my third Nightblade secret, and what I believe to be my superpower as a Nightblade: absolute paranoia. When I play a ganking oriented Nightblade, I realize that any mistake I make could lead to instant death. I hate dying in any video game, so I try not to rush into battle without a plan. Whenever I'm fighting in Cyrodiil, I consider the possibility that there's someone like me looking out to get me. This helps me to stay focused and be ready for the moment that I am indeed attacked by another Nightblade, or someone who really has it out for Nightblades. This mentality leads me to take certain measures when engaging in combat. First of all, if I can, I make sure to place a shade. A shade is a much better defensive mobility tool than Shadowy Cloak, as invisibility can be countered by means of Mage Light, Expert Hunter, or a detection potion. A well-placed shade essentially has no counter apart from someone camping it, and it can buy you several seconds in which you can either heal up or make sure that you escape. I sometimes even reveal myself voluntarily to the enemies if I have a shade nearby, as it might make them waste a lot of time looking for me in the wrong place. Mind that placing a shade does pull you out of stealth, so it might not always be the best idea to pop one out in a heavily chaotic battlefield. I mentioned detection potions just now, and I consider them to be an essential tool to use for any Nightblade. Not just because I like to hunt other Nightblades and gankers to assert dominance over them, but also because they can buy me a little more security when attacking an unsuspecting target. Like I said earlier, enemy sieges might be guarded by Nightblades who pop out of the shadows just as you try and go for the kill. So what I often do is that I pop a detection potion right before attacking an enemy during a siege, just to make sure there won't be any nasty surprises waiting for me in stealth. If I do spot a Nightblade near my initial target, I will immediately prioritize taking out the Nightblade. Depending on how hot the scene is, I will then continue to attack the initial target or retreat temporarily. So far, we have shades and the offensive use of detection potions, but what about the most iconic skill in the Nightblade's toolkit? Shadowy Cloak. In spite of having various effective counters, invisibility is an extremely powerful tool, but it becomes that much more powerful if you know how to use it correctly. Being a little bit paranoid definitely helps with that. When I play a Nightblade ganker, I tend to spend as much time as possible in stealth. I have virtually no defensive prowess, so my best defense is making sure that I'm not seen in the first place. If, by whatever means, an enemy becomes aware of my presence, I must also make sure that I'm not hiding in an obvious place. So often I see Nightblades try to get away, cloaking while running in a straight line, even after their invisibility has been compromised. It's kind of like how in a cartoon the character is being chased by a giant boulder and just keeps running in a straight path instead of dashing off to the side. So, unless you want to end up getting flattened like Wile E. Coyote, you have to be smart about your cloak usage. A lot of this comes down to developing instincts, but try darting off into a direction that no one would expect, like cloak and run towards the enemy group. Odds are they'll just run past you. Sometimes I'll leave cloak through a fault of my own. Maybe I was low on magicka, I refreshed my cloak too late, or I just fell victim to the usual ability lag. Even when it happens to me in a seemingly empty field, I do not continue running in the same trajectory when I re-enter stealth. Instead, I'll start running into some other direction and eventually circle back to where I was going. The last thing you'll want is some unknown observer predicting your exact trajectory, popping a detection potion and slamming you when you come near. Playing like someone's always watching me has allowed me to rarely slack off and lose my grip on a situation. While the precautions you take to avoid getting ganked yourself might often prove to be unnecessary, preparing for the worst can save you from a lot of embarrassment. And as we all know, not getting embarrassed too much is one of the main requirements for being a successful Nightblade. This leads me to my next dirty secret: playing to your strengths, not your weaknesses. If you ever play in a group, whether it's a pickup group or a guild, you will normally be expected to do certain things: put up siege when attacking, repair doors after a defense, capture a resource, etc. Being a Nightblade ganker puts you in a different category, however. Not only is it extremely risky to siege when you're packing a lousy HP bar and almost no resist, but you're also depriving your team of an extremely important service: protecting other siegers. This means that instead of sieging myself, I will patrol the sieging area when we're taking outer, or guard the main gate or front door when you play an NA, while my allies are sieging inner, as I'll be much more useful sniffing out defenders than standing idle and undefended behind a ballista. I don't often play my Nightblade in groups, but when I do, I make sure to clear with my raid leader that I won't be putting up any sieges, but instead help defend the sieges that others put up. Likewise, I'm usually one of the first to run into a keep when the main gate is breached, so I can go up on the walls and kill the defenders, allowing my allies to enter the keep more easily. This might sound counterintuitive, as there's often a lot of defense on the breach, but I often find that simply roll dodging twice into the breach, popping a tricep potion and entering stealth, and then running off to the side usually buys me enough time to start tormenting what's left of the enemy defense. So, while Nightblades are not typically seen as the best team players, we still have tools that can make us a unique asset to our allies. Make sure to play to this, as you can just as easily be a liability to your team. Fixing a door with a 21k health pool means that any bomber nearby is going to have an easy time proccing vicious death. But if you instead pop a detect potion while stealthed and look for said bomber, there's a good chance that you'll save a bunch of lives. There are also some things that I flat out don't do when I'm on a ganking build, such as capturing resources or towns solo. All it takes is one semi-competent player to take my exposed ass out. My final dirty secret is one that sort of sums up all of the previous points, and one that really comes down to common sense. Remain mobile and situationally aware. Like I explained earlier, doing anything as a Nightblade in a common situation, whether it's actually ganking someone or just popping out of stealth, will earn you some wanted stars. Enemy Nightblades are considered a priority threat by experienced PvPers and first-time Zerglings alike. You're an unknown factor. No one really knows when you will strike and how hard, so it's safest to just take you out ASAP. Play around this idea by always remaining on the move. The longer you linger in a place, the more likely it becomes that the sword that you just ganked will come back for some sweet revenge. I use this to my advantage on the off chance, the very rare occasion, the anomalous occurrence that I get ganked myself. I'll simply go back to the place where the enemy Nightblade no doubt used some exploit to get the better of me, and more often than not, they'll be still around that area. This can take what I consider to be extreme forms. I once got killed by 2 enemy Nightblades while we were sieging Fort Ash. There was no forward camp up, so I respawned at Nickel Outpost, rode all the way back to the crime scene, popped a detect potion, and delivered an Uno reverse car to those same 2 Nightblades, who were still chilling at the exact same spot. Now, I don't say crime scene randomly, because as a Nightblade, you should treat your kill zone like a crime scene. Gank 1 or 2 people? Great, get the hell out of there. Did you just incap someone's hairline off the left side of the siege? Move your ass over to the right side of the siege and do it again. Stay mobile and make sure that you maintain the element of surprise as much as possible. So, these are all of my dirty secrets that might help you to become a better Nightblade. Some of these skills just come by themselves with experience, but I'm sure that if you apply some of these lessons next time the White Strike's Mayhem comes around, you'll get the upper hand on a lot of Nightblades, as most of them do not tend to think beyond cloaking and using their ulti. Do you have any dastardly tactics you employ while ganking? Do let me know and together we can put some Nightblade tourists in their place. Thanks for watching and remember, a day without ganking is a day without living. Cheers! But a stage 3 vampire with defensive fucking muffin, echt kom op.